Good evening. I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Nawaz. On the NewsHour tonight, the Federal Reserve cuts interest rates amid pressure from the president as the U.S. economy faces an uncertain future.
The United Kingdom honors President Trump with a lavish state visit amid a tense time for foreign relations.
And a panel commissioned by the United Nations determines Israel is committing genocide in Gaza as violence escalates and a ceasefire remains elusive.
Virtually the entire community of international human rights lawyers, we've never seen a consensus as clear as this one, and now this additional report on top of that.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation, upholding freedom by strengthening democracies at home and abroad. The Ford Foundation, working with visionaries on the front lines of social change worldwide.
I absolutely love my job because I love the people I work with. Everyone is trying to connect on a personal level.
We look out for one another. We love to see our teammates thrive.
You don't have to change how you walk. You don't have to change how you talk.
We can bring our authentic selves to work and do our best stuff. That's joy.
In 1995, two friends set out to make wireless coverage accessible to all. With no long-term contracts, nationwide coverage, and 100% US-based customer support. Consumer Cellular. Freedom calls.
The Walton Family Foundation, working for solutions to protect water during climate change so people and nature can thrive together. Supported by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information at macfound.org. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. The Federal Reserve cut its benchmark interest rate today for the first time this year, dropping it by a quarter point to between 4 and 4.25%.
And the change could have an impact on many lending rates, including for mortgages, credit cards, and auto loans, with the Fed also suggesting 2 more cuts by the end of the year. Federal Reserve Governor Stephen Miron, the Trump appointee confirmed by the Senate just a day before the policy meeting kicked off, was the lone dissenter, choosing instead to call for a deeper half-point cut. Today, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell explained why the rest of the committee opted for a smaller cut.
There wasn't widespread support at all for a 50 basis point cut today. You know, I think we've done very large rate hikes and very large rate cuts in the last 5 years, and you tend to do those at a time when you feel that policy is out of place and needs to move quickly to a new place. That's not at all what I feel certainly now. I feel like our policy has been doing the right thing so far this year. I think we were right to wait and see how tariffs and inflation and the labor market evolved.
For Insight, we're joined again tonight by Ron Insana, a contributor to CNBC and publisher of the Substack column, The Message of the Markets. Ron, it's always great to see you. So the Fed cut rates by a quarter point as expected, and Powell hinted at 2 more rates to come. So what does all of this tell you about what the state of the economy is?
Well, I think the Fed chair and the statement from the policy setting committee was pretty clear. The labor market has weakened noticeably, and that appears to be, at least for now, the bigger of the 2 risks facing the economy, the labor market getting weaker or inflation getting stronger. Now, clearly, inflation is above trend. It's above where the Fed wants it to be. It wants it closer to 2% rather than 3%. But there have been disruptions in the labor market that push the Fed into cutting interest rates by this quarter point, as you mentioned. And I think in this instance, it is somewhat devoid of political pressure, despite what Mr. Miron wants to do. This was an appropriate move, as Jay Powell suggested. And there may or may not be more cuts down the road, but the economy is strong in some parts, weak in others. And I think the Fed, as Jay Powell also suggested throughout his commentary, this was a risk management rate cut, not the start of something much bigger like a huge drop in interest rates in the near term.
A risk management rate cut. So when will everyday Americans feel the impact of lower borrowing costs, and in what ways?
Well, not tomorrow. I mean, I think, when you look at the broad spectrum of interest rates, the 10-year note yield, which is what mortgages are based on, actually went up a little bit to 4.08%. Credit card rates aren't really that sensitive to what the Federal Reserve does. Credit card rates are averaging about 20%. If they come down a little bit, it'll be surprising, but they may. Mortgage rates have come down a lot in the last couple of weeks. The average 30-year fixed rate mortgage is now about 6.3%. We've seen a surge of refinancing. So that's where we may see the most activity, particularly if that 10-year note yield should start to drift back towards 4% or maybe even a little bit below it.
And Powell also flagged immigration as a bigger driver of labor market dynamics as opposed to tariffs. How significant is that shift in emphasis?
I think it's extraordinarily significant. I mean, as you've seen, raids on various employer operations, in some cases plants that weren't being finished but were being worked on by legal those who hold visas, work visas to be here in the United States, South Koreans in particular. I think it's critical because the size of the labor market is shrinking as demand for labor also is being reduced. That's something that's kind of confusing to the Federal Reserve, which is accustomed to a different style of labor market, either one that's overheating and growing so fast and we're adding a lot of people, or one that's shrinking really quickly and we're losing a lot of folks. The unemployment rate goes up. That's not what we're seeing right now. There's very much a different dynamic at work at the moment.
We've got Stephen Miron now on the board, as we mentioned. There is this ongoing debate and this pressure on Lisa Cook. How should we understand this broader battle over the Fed's composition and credibility?
Well, I think this is an important, in fact, maybe the most important long-term question for the economy going forward is the credibility and the independence of the Federal Reserve. If, as the president has voiced his opinion in regard to this, he would like to see the Federal Reserve filled with those who believe, as he does, that interest rates should be substantially lower, so much so that it would ease the burden of how much we pay in terms of interest on the federal debt, would stimulate the economy further, which may or may not be necessary because it could produce higher rates of inflation. But packing the Fed, as it were, to use an old expression, is something the president seems bent on doing, and again, calling into question the independence and even in some cases the competence of certain Federal Reserve officials down the road could make foreign buyers of U.S. Treasuries less likely to do so. It could drive up the cost of U.S. debt, and it could make the dollar weaker over time. So in a certain sense, the president's playing with fire here. The Federal Reserve has done, over time, a very good job at generally maintaining equilibrium in the economy and meeting its statutory mandates of maximum employment and stable prices for the most part. Trying just to get interest rates down for the sake of getting them down for political reasons other than economic reasons is a very dangerous game.
Ron Insana, CNBC contributor and publisher of the Substack column, The Message of the Markets. Good to see you, friend.
You also, thank you.
In the day's other headlines, President Trump enjoyed a warm welcome to Britain's Windsor Castle today, where his royal host put on a display of pageantry, pomp, and military parades. It's an unprecedented second state visit for Mr. Trump, and it comes with both regal spectacle and real-world diplomacy. That's due to include the signing tomorrow of a civilian nuclear power deal and a massive transatlantic tech agreement.
At Windsor Castle, a chopper-side personal welcome from the Prince and Princess of Wales. And a gilded entrance fit for a king, a queen, and an American president, as President Trump was greeted with the full royal treatment upon arrival in the United Kingdom.
That included 1,300 armed troops and a royal review of guards, all part of the largest military welcome for a state visit in British history. King Charles later escorted President Trump into the oldest castle in the world to view the royal collection.
That's so amazing.
Tables adorned with mementos of U.S.-British relations, including documents of America's independence nearly 250 years ago. By comparison, today's pomp and circumstance was a stark upgrade from Trump's last state visit in 2019.
The president is a bit of a showman. The UK wanted to put on a good show, and they were able to do it with the blessing of the king. So all the stops were pulled out. Soft diplomacy from the royal family. It seemed, by all accounts, and looking at all the pictures that have come out, that the king and President Trump got on extremely well.
Dickie Arbiter is a royal watcher and former press secretary for Queen Elizabeth II.
I suppose it was done because the UK wants to please Trump. The UK wants something out of America. You know, we've got all these tariffs going on. Various countries have got 50%, one or two have got 100%, UK 25%. They want to get it down. Our economy is not very good at the moment. Our government is not particularly good either.
For the first time ever during a state visit, the military's beating retreat ceremony was performed. Today, complete with soldiers dressed as American revolutionaries and a flyover of British Red Arrow jets. The pageantry was not without protests, including images of President Trump and the late convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein together, projected onto the side of Windsor Castle last night.
Donald Trump, you can't hide!
And today, thousands pouring into the streets of London to show their dissent. All this as the UK announces tens of billions of dollars worth of technology deals with American tech giants Microsoft, Nvidia, and OpenAI to open new data centers in the UK. Tomorrow, a new deal is expected to be unveiled for the US and UK to share American nuclear reactor technology and lower nuclear regulations.
The ocean may still divide us, but in so many other ways, we are now the closest of kin.
But tonight, the festivities continue to unfold as the special relationship between these two nations enters a new era. Also today, FBI Director Kash Patel repeatedly told House lawmakers that recent court orders prohibit him from releasing files related to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein.
I'm not going to break the law to satisfy your curiosity.
In his second day of contentious hearings on Capitol Hill, Patel faced bipartisan criticism for not releasing all Epstein information in the FBI's possession. Patel also told lawmakers he's never spoken to President Trump about the Epstein files. And he once again said there's no credible information to suggest that Epstein trafficked women to anyone other than himself.
Other than Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, your testimony in the Senate and here is that according to the evidence you have, the number of other names is 0.
That were charged based on credible evidence.
Well, who are the other names? Give me the other names that weren't charged.
We are not releasing the names of anyone because the Department of Justice never does that of anyone that didn't have any credible information to attack them.
In that same exchange, Patel agreed to look into the sexually suggestive letter that President Trump allegedly sent Epstein as part of a birthday book in 2003. Trump has denied writing it, saying it's fake. Today's hearing in the House comes a day after Patel clashed with Senate Democrats over his handling of the Charlie Kirk investigation and more. Today, authorities in Utah gave more details about the arrest of the suspected shooter. A sheriff involved with taking Tyler Robinson into custody said he feared being shot by police and agreed to surrender peacefully. Prosecutors say they'll seek the death penalty for the 22-year-old. Also today, students at Utah Valley University returned to classes for the first time since last week's assassination. The site of the shooting area is still blocked off. A large American flag is now draped near where Kirk was speaking when he was shot. In Pittsburgh, FBI officials say they're treating a car ramming at their local field office as a, quote, act of terror. Authorities say a suspect is in custody after a car crashed into a security gate early this morning. The driver threw an American flag over the gate before fleeing the scene on foot. He was arrested hours later. Officials say the man was familiar to the FBI office and made a complaint there in recent weeks. No one was injured, and authorities are still trying to determine the motive. Jerry of Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream is leaving the iconic brand he co-founded nearly 5 decades ago. In a letter, Jerry Greenfield says the company's long-held commitment to social activism, quote, has been silenced, sidelined for fear of upsetting those in power. Most recently, the real-life Ben & Jerry have spoken out against Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza. Today's decision comes after years of increasing tensions between the ice cream makers and Unilever, which bought the company 25 years ago. Magnum, Unilever's new spin-off for its ice cream business, said today that it disagrees with Greenfield's perspective, but is committed to the brand's mission. The widow of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny says that new evidence proves her husband was poisoned shortly before his sudden death in an Arctic penal colony last year. In a video posted to social media, his wife and political successor, Yulia Navalnaya, points to incident reports and photos suggesting Navalny vomited and convulsed in his final moments. She also says that samples from Navalny's body had been smuggled out of Russia to be tested at 2 independent labs, and that the results prove he was poisoned.
I will not be silent. I affirm that Vladimir Putin is guilty of killing my husband, Alexei Navalny. I accuse the Russian special services of developing prohibited chemical and biological weapons.
Navalnaya urged the labs to release their findings. She did not provide direct proof of her claims herself. Today, a Kremlin spokesperson said he was unaware of Navalnaya's statement. Russian authorities say the 47-year-old Navalny fell ill after taking a walk, but have otherwise provided few details on his death. On Wall Street today, stocks ended mixed following that interest rate cut by the Federal Reserve. The Dow Jones Industrial Average added 260 points on the day. The Nasdaq slipped around 70 points. The S&P 500 fell back slightly from its recent all-time highs. Still to come on the NewsHour, the ousted director of the CDC testifies before Congress. Senate Republicans changed their rules to push through the president's judicial nominees. And a woman wrongfully detained in the Trump administration's immigration crackdown speaks out.
This is the PBS NewsHour from the David M. Rubenstein Studio at WETA in Washington, and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
Former CDC Director Susan Menarez gave her first detailed account of her high-profile firing during a Senate hearing today. Menarez was ousted less than a month into the job, making her the shortest-lived director in the agency's history. 2 other top officials resigned in protest, including the CDC's then chief medical officer, who testified alongside Menarez today. Questions about the future of vaccine policy were front and center. Congressional correspondent Lisa Desjardins has our report.
A remarkable hearing.
I could have kept the office, the title, but I would have lost the one thing that cannot be replaced: my integrity.
2 recent Trump CDC officials, former Director Susan Menarez and former Chief Medical Officer Deborah Howry, raising sharp questions about sitting cabinet secretary and their former boss, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Secretary Kennedy censored CDC science, politicized its processes, and stripped leaders of independence. I could not, in good conscience, remain under those conditions.
Howry resigned after Menarez was fired last month. That firing and its relationship to vaccine policy were the key foci today. Menarez told senators that days before her firing, Kennedy gave her orders regarding ACIP, the key vaccine advisory board he had just replaced.
He directed me to commit in advance to approving every ACIP recommendation, regardless of the scientific evidence. He also directed me to dismiss career officials responsible for vaccine policy without cause. I told the secretary that if he believed he could not trust me, he could fire me.
You had an employee.
A far cry from Secretary Kennedy's account in a hearing earlier this month.
I told her that she had to resign because I asked her, are you a trustworthy person? And she said no.
So you're saying she's lying?
Yes.
At stake is an even larger battle about truth. What does science say about vaccines? Secretary Kennedy has long insisted that science has led him to question the current use of some vaccines, and that he and President Trump want radical transparency about data. But Monarez told senators there's already clear and strong data about vaccines, and Kennedy was going to change vaccine recommendations for kids this month without enough data.
We got into an exchange where I had suggested that I would be open to changing childhood vaccine schedules if the evidence or science were supportive. And he responded that there was no science or evidence associated with the childhood vaccine schedule. And he elaborated that CDC had never collected the science or the data to make it available related to the safety and efficacy.
To be clear, he said there was not science or data, but that you still expected you to change the schedule.
Correct.
Kennedy has repeatedly said HHS did not fund the kinds of studies he thinks are needed. But decades of research, trials, and practice have gone into the current vaccine guidelines.
What is the science?
One Republican pushed hardest on Monarez for her vaccine stance, Kentucky's Rand Paul, who also questioned her word.
The burden is upon you and the people you wouldn't fire to prove to us that we need to give our 6-month-old a COVID vaccine and that we need to give our 1-day-old a hepatitis B vaccine. That's what the debate ought to be about, not whether all vaccines are good or whether we live in Alice in Wonderland.
I actually agree with you, and I was open to the science. I just would not pre-commit to approving all the ACIP recommendations without the science.
Untrue.
The American Academy of Pediatrics has said adults with hepatitis B may not be aware they have it, and immunizing newborns is critical to reduce chronic hepatitis B later in life. Democrats raised a host of concerns, including a targeted shooting spree at the CDC over a month ago that left a police officer dead, and the atmosphere for those still there.
These are unsung heroes.
The witnesses spoke personally.
I myself was subject to threats.
I have many that won't speak about vaccines now to remove their names off of papers.
So you know of personnel who now will not put their name behind good science.
Correct.
That they know would protect the health and safety of families and children because of their fear of violence.
Correct.
The CDC's newly formed Vaccine Advisory Committee is set to meet this week to make recommendations. Monarez and Howry warned today about what they fear from any change to key immunization schedules like those for hepatitis B and measles.
These diseases have long-term consequences, and we don't need, in the U.S., we have gone so far in reversing this. We don't want our children to die.
Howry said in that hearing that Secretary Kennedy, in her opinion, should resign. I asked Senator Cassidy if he would still vote to confirm Kennedy if the vote were today. He said he's waiting for and hopes for Senator Kennedy to respond to today's hearing first. Meantime, Cassidy says the vaccine advisory hearing meeting for tomorrow should be postponed. We have no evidence that it will be.
So, Lisa, how is Secretary Kennedy responding to all of this?
We got this statement from the White House when I asked about the hearing, and they wrote saying that simply no one in the Trump administration is calling to throw out the entire childhood vaccine schedule or block access to life-saving vaccines. But when you think about that statement, I didn't hear anyone accusing them of that. I think the question is here, what do they want to do with vaccines? What do the changes mean? Are they based on data? And how would they affect availability? One other note about this hearing, Jeff, it's hard to tell from off the Hill, but this was extraordinary. I can't remember any time that some senator of the Republican especially, but any president's party has had such a critical hearing of a sitting cabinet member from that party.
Well, that's right. You know, Republicans control the Senate. They control the committee before which Monarez testified. So it was Republicans who wanted to hear her perspective. I mean, that's striking.
This was a statement from the chairman, Bill Cassidy. And remember, he is up for re-election. He is facing pressure from the right and the left. This is why he was really carefully navigating his own statements. But the hearing itself was a statement.
All right, let's shift our focus a bit because we are facing another potential government shutdown. Here we go again.
I know.
How is this all unfolding?
All right, it seems like we have a lot of time in terms of the way the Congress works, but we don't because Congress is gone next week. So really, ideally, they should be figuring this all out this week if they want to get funding in place by September 30th. And Republicans do have a proposal. Here's what they plan to vote on in the House later this week. The idea is to extend government funding to November 21st to try and work out appropriations in the meantime. Now, in their bill, there would be $88 million for more security following the assassination of Charlie Kirk for executive, legislative, and judicial branch. It would also restore Washington, D.C.'s spending ability. That was frozen. The district lost some $400 million because of that. So now the issue is here, the votes. Republicans can only lose 2 votes to get this through the House. And, we have 2 Republicans who have problems with it. Imagine that. Thomas Massie there on the left, he is a hard no. But Warren Davidson of Ohio was a no on Monday. Now he's a maybe. This is going to be close. We expect that vote on Friday. If it gets through the House, then the Senate is a whole other question where Senate Democrats, many of them are hoping to block this. That is what would potentially lead to a shutdown.
And the Senate Democratic leader, Chuck Schumer, is talking tough right now. But back in March, was it, the last time this came about? He moved to avoid a government shutdown. He was on this program and said he thought a shutdown would be worse for the country. So how do Democrats see his result?
That's right. This is a lot on Senator Schumer's shoulders. And I have to tell you that Senate Democrats I've been texting with say he is resolved. And I just have some breaking news about what he plans to ask for. So here's what we want to look at what we've learned. This is what Democrats are going to ask for in order to go along with the funding bill. They want to extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits, which expire at the end of the year, repeal the Medicaid cuts that were in the Big Beautiful Bill Act, and restore some of the rescission funding that was cut, including, I'm told, the funding that was cut from public broadcasting. Now, this is a Democratic wish list. We already know Republicans are against those first 2 items. We will see what they think about the rescissions. But what this tells me, bottom line, is that we are probably closer to a shutdown than farther away from one, and time is far shorter than people realize.
Real-time breaking news reporting. Lisa Desjardins on top of it all, as always. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Today, Israeli troops pushed deeper into Gaza City, part of an operation Israel says is designed to seize Gaza's largest city and defeat Hamas. Dozens more Palestinians were killed today in Israeli attacks. Health officials in Gaza announced earlier today that more than 65,000 Palestinians have now been killed in nearly 2 years of war. And a coalition of leading aid groups urged the international community to take stronger measures to stop the offensive after a commission of UN experts accused Israel of committing genocide. Here's Nick Schifrin with more.
An independent international commission attached to the UN's Human Rights Council released its report this week that accuses Israel of an ongoing genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. The UN's Genocide Convention defines genocide as acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group, and cites as examples killing, injuring, inflicting conditions calculated to bring about physical destruction, preventing births, or transferring children. The commission accuses Israel of committing at least 4 of those 5 acts, and that statements made by Israeli authorities are, quote, direct evidence of genocidal intent. Then Defense Minister Yoav Gallant here on October 9th, 2023.
We are ordering a complete siege on Gaza. No electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals, and we are acting accordingly.
To discuss the report, I first turned to Craig Mokhiber. He's an international human rights lawyer and former senior UN official, and he joins me now from New York. Craig Mokhiber, thanks very much. Welcome to the NewsHour. This charge of genocide has been made before. How is this report different than previous documents that made this accusations, and why is this significant?
Well, this report is the result of 2 years of internationally mandated investigations, 80 pages of detailed facts and legal analysis, and all conducted by a panel of very highly qualified, highly respected international human rights experts and jurists. And of course, it follows upon earlier findings of genocide by the UN Special Rapporteur, virtually the entire community of international human rights lawyers. We've never seen a consensus as clear as this one. And now this additional report on top of that, a very serious, officially mandated report, I think is the final piece in the puzzle of accountability that people have been trying to build for 2 years of genocide.
Israel, of course, denies that it's committing genocide. If anything, it blames Hamas on committing genocide, stating Hamas's charter. And let's talk about intent, which, of course, is what makes genocide legally unique, but also very difficult to prove. Israeli officials have disputed the argument in this report that senior officials' statement somehow prove intent. The Israeli argument is that some of those statements were taken out of context and that they are made by politicians, not the executors of the military campaign. And the people who are executing the military campaign are inside the IDF and they follow international humanitarian law. What's your response to that argument?
Well, that's not a very convincing argument. In fact, it's an unusual argument. Normally, the argument that is made is, well, those people who made those statements are marginal characters. In this case, we're talking about the president, the prime minister, at least 7 members of the Israeli cabinet, senior military commanders, commanders on the ground, and all the way down the chain of command. And what the commission has shown, and others before them has shown, is that these statements are made. They are then repeated down the chain of command, and in fact, they are perpetrated on the ground with a genocidal fury that is undeniable. They looked at every aspect of the situation on the ground to align the facts with the statements and to conclude that indeed the intent is genocide and the acts are genocide.
Intent can also be proven by a pattern of conduct on the ground. And in fact, Israel points at what Hamas is doing inside Gaza and says the report does not take into account how Hamas fights using hospitals as bases, which I have personally witnessed in Gaza, and fighting from tunnels underneath civilian infrastructure. Doesn't the circumstance of this war change the assessment of Israel's conduct?
It does not. Even if the premise were true, which is often proven not to be true. But let's say that a combatant is alleged to be in a hospital or surrounded by civilians in a refugee shelter. That does not relieve the responsibility of Israel to respect international law. They are still bound by the principles of precaution and distinction and proportionality, respect for protected persons, the systematic targeting of virtually every hospital in Gaza, the targeting of schools and churches and mosques and refugee shelters and community facilities, of aid warehouses and aid distribution points. There is no way that they can justify this either legally or in fact by simply using the magic word Hamas or the magic word terrorist. That does not have that effect in international law.
And finally, the commission today accuses Israel of intentionally using starvation as a method of warfare. But Israel argues it has allowed 2 million tons of aid into the Gaza Strip, over 1 ton of aid per person, and that it's Hamas who's actually stealing the aid in order to pay its fighters.
If it is true that aid is being allowed in, which is denied by all those responsible for distributing aid, except for the Israelis and their mechanisms themselves, somehow people are still starving to death, and somehow we had last month a declaration of famine in Gaza. There is famine in Gaza. People are starving to death, and that is the result of the intentional policies of the Israeli regime.
Craig McIver, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And for the other perspective, I spoke earlier today to Dr. Eran Shamir Borer, director of the Israel Democracy Institute Center for Security and Democracy, and the former head of the Israel Defense Forces International Law Department. He was also a member of Israel's defense team at the International Court of Justice. Eran Shamir Borer, thanks very much. Welcome to the NewsHour. As we've been discussing, the Genocide Convention lists a series of acts that must be committed, quote, with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. The report says that Israel's intent is proven through statements. Then Defense Minister Yoav Gallant saying Israel is, quote, fighting human animals, President Isaac Herzog saying the entire Palestinian nation was responsible, and others. Do those statements not prove the intent to destroy?
I think the report is wrong about the law, is wrong about the facts, and also wrong about the methodology. So first and foremost, these statements it's like an effort of cherry picking, very selective quotations, completely ignoring the context or many, many other statements by the same individuals. And also they fail to remind, that the IDF is not operating, is not conducting itself based on statements of this or other politician. But it's a very disciplined military operating, under very clear and written decisions of Israeli war cabinet, basing its operational decisions on standing operating procedures and rules of engagement. And these are that statements, even though, some of them I think are highly regrettable, some of them even reprehensible statements, I would say. But that's not the way that militaries in democracies, including in Israel, operate. It's just not the way that militaries function.
Intent can also be established by a pattern of conduct on the ground, and the report argues the IDF has conducted indiscriminate bombing. The UN says 78% of Gaza's structures have been damaged or destroyed. Is that not proof of the intent to destroy?
First of all, because when assessing the legality of the conduct of militaries, you need information about what were the operational justifications for a specific attack or a specific decision to destruct, for instance, a specific facility, right? And the committee, they had no access to this information. They only rely on information released by Hamas itself. And when you look into specific incidents, they only, rely on very partial data. They never mention, what was the target of the strike. For instance, they refer in one of the incidents they mentioned to an attack on the European hospital, as they mentioned. Now, Israel already released extensive information that it wasn't attacking the hospital. It was actually attacking the target, was actually military infrastructure underneath the hospital. Mohammed Sinwar, no less than the head of Hamas, died as a result of this attack. He was the target of the attack. The report simply, fails to mention any of this and try to depict a reality as if Israel is just purposefully attacking medical facilities. That's totally not the case. You can't assess the legality of Israeli actions without actually also assessing Hamas's conduct. And this is the conduct of the terror organizations that carried out attacks against Israeli civilians, that booby-traps its own military facility, its own civilian infrastructure, that shields itself with its own civilians, that built, dug a very extensive tunnels underneath Gaza. And I think that's, it's outrageous. It's unprofessional, and it's also a test, I think, to the partiality and bias of the committee.
The report makes a separate legal argument that Israel has blocked humanitarian aid. There was a time when Israel allowed 0 trucks in. Israel this week has announced additional steps to try and let trucks in, but humanitarian officials in the region tell us even today that the number of trucks getting in is no more than 100. That is 1/6 the number that the UN says is necessary to feed Gaza. So has Israel not blocked humanitarian aid from going into Gaza?
For a very long time, for over a year and a half, Israel allowed and facilitated any aid to go into Gaza. It's true that after the ceasefire, when there was a huge storage, supply of aid inside Gaza, then Israel halted the aid for a while. But again, the report totally ignores the reality in which Hamas simply steals significant portions of this aid, commandeering some of the aid going in, and in this way, actually, sustaining its war effort against Israel.
Eran Shamir Borer, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Now to the Trump administration's aggressive approach to immigration enforcement and the case of a U.S. citizen who was caught in the middle. Andrea Velez says she was wrongfully arrested this past summer in downtown Los Angeles, swept up in an immigration raid on her way to work. Velez says she froze, was knocked to the ground by an ICE officer, and despite declaring her citizenship, was detained and led to a car. Fearing she was being kidnapped, she ran toward nearby LAPD officers when ICE agents caught her and carried her back. She spent 2 nights in jail before facing a felony charge for obstructing an officer, a charge the Justice Department dropped 2 weeks later. I spoke earlier with Andrea Velez and her attorney, Luis Carrillo. Thank you both for being with us. Andrea, we'll start with you. Take us back to that morning. Your mother and sister had just dropped you off for work. What happened next?
Suddenly, I saw these cars swerving in, and I just remembered that they got out their cars abruptly, and then they just looked like they were just ready to attack and chase. They never identified themselves as ICE agents. they just started chasing people, and I remember watching just people running. And one of them, I think, was a street vendor. And that's when I noticed one coming towards my direction, and I used my bag as a form of protection to shield myself. Then I remember that he just got and pushed me and slammed me to the floor, to the ground. He started proceeding to say that I was interfering and that he was going to arrest me. I asked him for his badge number and his identification, and also if he had a warrant. And he said that I didn't need to know any of that because all I had to look was at his vests. They were all wearing civilian clothing, sneakers, and gator masks. And when he was trying to arrest me, I noticed that there was people filming, and I started saying my name. I'm a U.S. citizen, and I started saying my mom's name and her number because I wasn't sure if she was gonna know where I was at. I just remember thinking like she's probably gonna wait for me to come home, and I'm never gonna come home. So that's why I started saying my name. And then when he decided to take me inside the car, he took my belongings. The ICE agent took my belongings. They left me in the car by myself. And I remember there was belongings, a backpack, and I remember there was a phone. I remember it just looked like a regular car. And then when they left me alone, I noticed a helicopter swerving in, and I started hearing the LAPD come in, and somehow I managed to open the door. The door unlocked by itself, and that's when I started running to LAPD, thinking that they could help me. And I knew that if that they were there, that they were gonna protect me because they have uniforms on. And one of them said it's okay, and he just told me to put my hands behind my back and to face face the front. Out of nowhere, I noticed that one of the ICE agents was coming, and he said, "She's mine." And then they let them take me, and that's when I felt I felt like there's nothing I can do. I wasn't resisting or anything, and the ICE agent decided to make a show out of the whole thing, and he picked me up from my body, and then he just decided to put me down. And then they took me into the car again.
He said, "She's mine," physically picked you up off the ground and took you back to the car.
Yeah, yes, correct.
When you told that ICE agent that you were a U.S. citizen, what was the response?
It didn't seem like they cared. I even at one point in the car, I they were talking about how many bodies they got that day. They then one the driver he proceeded to say that I was an alleged U.S. citizen, so he 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 didn't never bother checking my identification. Not until we were already inside there, inside the place. Um, yeah.
Mr. Correa, what is the status of Andrea's case today?
They dismissed the criminal charges against her in the federal courts. We have filed a claim, which is the precursor to a lawsuit against the federal government because they had no basis to arrest her at all. And so what we have seen, we represent 9 U.S. citizens who were manhandled, beaten, thrown to the ground. And the ICE agents or Border Patrol agents never acknowledged their pleas when they were saying, "I'm a U.S. citizen, I'm a U.S. citizen."
What does justice look like for Ms. Velez and the other people you represent?
Justice looks for us, we're making a monetary claim, but the ideal is that they stop, ICE and Border Patrol, they stop doing this damage to our people. But they're rounding up everybody that has a brown skin in California, and it's happening in other places. We want that to stop.
Ms. Velez, how long were you held and what were the conditions like in the detention center?
I was there on Tuesday evening towards Thursday morning. I remember there wasn't a bed for me. So the ladies that were in there were nice enough to grab me a bed. They told me that if I wanted to drink water, I had to grab a cup, but the cup I had to pay for. And because I didn't have money on my commissary account, I couldn't get water. One of the nice people there let me borrow their cup for like just to drink, and then later that day, this lady she was getting out that day, and she was nice enough to give me her cup and her spork, so I could eat that day. So they had given rice and chicken in the dinner, so I was able to eat a little bit of that.
You've been working remotely because you're afraid to go downtown. Is that right? What has this experience been like for you? How has it changed you?
It's been challenging just because you're not safe outside, and now that they are still rounding up people, it's every day. It's a fear, like where are they going to be at, or like you don't know what's going to happen. Yeah.
Andrea Velez, Luis Carrillo, we thank you both for your time.
And thank you for your
Thank you.
interest in Andrea's life.
Colleen Shogan made history when she became the first woman to serve as Archivist of the United States in 2023, until February, when President Trump fired her with no warning or reason given. Now, Shogan has a new challenge, which she unveiled during our exclusive interview. Today, Constitution Day, she launched a national bipartisan effort, part of an alliance of 34 presidential centers and some 100 groups called More Perfect, working to strengthen our democracy. This report is part of our series Art in Action, exploring the intersection of art and democracy, and part of our Canvas Arts coverage. At Lincoln's Cottage in Washington, D.C., Colleen Shogan knows history has its eyes on her. As the nation prepares to mark 250 years, she's working to steer it back on track with what she calls a civics education moonshot. What is the problem that you see needs fixing right now?
I think we have a crisis with civics education in this country. We know some of the statistics are alarming. About 22% of our nation's 8th graders are proficient in civics education. We also know that 70% of Americans, adults, would be unable to answer the basic questions on a civics or history test.
When you say that many Americans can't answer basic questions, what kind of questions are we talking about?
Something like how many branches of government are in the United States, or which branch of government is responsible for writing the laws, questions like that.
Shogan, who's helped to lead nonpartisan groups from the Library of Congress to the White House Historical Association to the Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission, is now spearheading a new national project to help fill that civics void. Called In Pursuit, it calls upon former presidents and first ladies like the Clintons, Bushes, and Obamas, historians and thought leaders, including multiple Pulitzer Prize winners, and journalists, including our own Judy Woodruff, each contributing an essay about a president or first lady, an idea born from Shogan's time leading the National Archives.
I visited all of the presidential libraries when I was the Archivist of the United States, and what I witnessed was that people can access American history through our presidents, through our first families. It's familiar to them, and it's an easy way in which we can tell lessons about American history through that lens. I used to walk into the rotunda on a daily basis where the founding documents are on display, and I got to talk to people from all across the United States. No matter what their political affiliation or where they came from geographically in the United States, they're proud of our history, and they understand that it is a mixture of good things that have happened, difficult challenges that have happened, and they want to learn about it.
The project's tagline says it plainly.
We call our nation the Great American Experiment. It's time to act like it.
Is it a call to action?
It's a call to think about our history and learn the lessons from it so we can inform our present and our future. I mean, history is not a static enterprise. History isn't just frozen in time. We should view history as a continuum. We should be able to look backwards, and as the National Archives on the building says, the past is prologue.
We're at a time when there are real debates over which parts of our history we remember, how we remember them, what's actually taught in our school system when it comes to American history. How do you view this effort in light of where we are?
I think we have to be accurate in our telling of American history. When we're talking about, the American story, and should we talk about our failures as well as our successes, how do you tell the story of American history accurately if you don't tell both? For example, how do you tell the story of a success like an Abraham Lincoln? I think most Americans would view Abraham Lincoln, his leadership, with a degree of admiration. But how do we really account for that success in Lincoln's leadership if we don't understand the failures that preceded him in order to solve the crisis of slavery in this country? You have to understand both so that we can appreciate the times when we got it right. We have to understand when we got it wrong.
That brings us to this moment we're seeing play out in real time when it comes to this administration and the pressure that's been applied on our Smithsonian system of museums. We know the president says he wants to review the exhibits. That's a moment of real tension we haven't seen before. How do you look at that?
All of these institutions are charged with preserving our nation's history and sharing our nation's history with all Americans. And the only way that these institutions can continue to be successful in their mission is if they remain independent.
You're speaking from some level of experience here.
Yes, I am.
You know what it is to be caught in that political crossfire. You'd served as the National Archivist since May of 2023, after the Senate confirmed you, and then you were fired by President Trump in February of this year. Were you surprised by that move? Did it catch you off guard?
It did catch me off guard. I think that anyone who has ever been in a situation similar to mine, in which you were doing your job and doing what you thought was a good job, and you were following, in my case, the law, and then to be dismissed in that way without any explanation or cause given, I think that you would have a degree of surprise, disappointment, and certainly at times anger.
To this day, you haven't been given a reason for why you were dismissed. Is that correct?
That's correct.
There was some understanding that because the president had been upset and publicly, vocally upset with the National Archives while the Justice Department was looking into his mishandling of classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, that it was related to that. We should point out you were not even in charge of the National Archives when that was going on. But do you believe that may be why you were fired?
That would be something you would have to ask the president and the White House, because they've not shared any reason with me.
Shogan learned she'd been fired from a post on X. President Trump tapped Secretary of State and acting National Security Advisor Marco Rubio to step in as acting archivist.
The laws that govern our records in the United States, that created the National Archives, they were all written under the premise or the guise that the person running the National Archives would be selected because of his or her qualifications, not with regard to partisanship or politics.
When you look at what's at stake at the institution you used to lead, the president's 2026 budget includes deep cuts, nearly $60 million less than the projected 2025 spending levels, over $90 million less than was spent in 2024. What's the impact of that going to be?
I think it's going to be challenging for the National Archives. When I was the Archivist of the United States, I spent a lot of time trying to do the reverse, which was to grow the budget of the National Archives in a responsible way. The National Archives is going to see a deluge of born digital or born electronic records starting in the next 5 to 10 years. And right now, the National Archives does not have the infrastructure to process those records or share those records with the American people. That system needs to be built. Otherwise, there is going to be a situation in which, in the future, Americans will not have access to those records.
Would you say that there's no cuts that need to be made at the archives? Is
There
that
are
the
no
argument?
cuts that need to be made at the National. In my experience, and I worked there and I led the institution.
In Pursuit hopes to reach 10 million Americans, including 5 million students. Shogun, who's previously penned novels about murder and mayhem, is now working on another book, this one about public service.
I'm doing what I really love doing, which is, sharing our nation's history with as many Americans as possible, talking about the importance of civics education. And what I just figured out was that I could do that no matter what role I had. So I'm very excited about this next opportunity and phase.
And join us again here tomorrow night as we take on the originalism debate and look at competing interpretations of the U.S. Constitution. That is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Nawaz. On behalf of the entire NewsHour team, thank you for joining us.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by friends of the NewsHour, including Jim and Nancy Bildner, and the Robert and Virginia Schiller Foundation.
Certified financial planner professionals are proud to support PBS NewsHour. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their clients' best interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.